He's best known as philosopher. He does have a PhD in philosophy. He studied not under Hegel, because Hegel was dead already. They didn't live, but he still studied, let's say, Hegel's program, still showing his slides, so to speak. So he did get influenced by that. But unlike what many people think, Marx was not. Why the people are rioting comes from, right? He would make this whole analysis of why something is happening, rather than just talking about the.
Doctor.
Oh, you cannot hear me. That is very unfortunate. Can you hear me now?
Yes, but you froze since the beginning of the class, like you were studying.
Okay, well, is it better if you. Okay, okay. Yeah, this is very unfortunate. Is my voice quality better now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, teacher.
Saying that Marx was not actually an academic. He didn't work at a university. Marx was a journalist. That's what he earned most of his money with. So Marx worked for many newspapers. The most famous one probably is a New York Tribune that he worked for as a foreign correspondent. And he also started various newspapers, but they would always be closed by the government because he was too critical. Because Marx, he would not just report on the facts. If there was a riot, he would not write about the riot. He would write about why the riot happened in the first place, right? And why the people are angry and things like that. So local government would usually send police to his door and have him arrested or have them close down the newspaper. So he lost like 4 or 5 businesses due to censorship, due to the government shutting him down and expelling him. So Marx, his life was kind of similar to that of Rousseau in the sense that he constantly got banned from places for being critical and for just sharing his ideas. He was actively prosecuted. First across Germany. Germany was made of many small states, so he moved from one state to the other. And then across Europe. He moved from Germany to France. He got banned in France. He moved to Belgium. In Belgium, he tried to make some sort of democratic revolution that also got him banned again. Back to France and up and down across Europe until he finally settled in London. Can you still hear me? Man, this is paranoid.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So he finally settled in London, where he lived the second half of his life, most of that in a poor neighborhood. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Marx's family situation, because it's relevant to the bigger picture. So Marx was from a middle-class background, but his wife, Jenny from Westphalen, was upper class. She was aristocracy. She was von Westphalen. Her brother, for example, was close to the king. But because Marx got prosecuted and they shut down his business so much, they actually let him go at the end. And very hard, 7 children and 4 causes hunger, etc. Right? So this topic of poverty was very tangible to him. Marx was not working class, but he was poor for most of his life, and very extreme poverty, right? Poverty that kills you. So he suffered a lot. The only reason he survived was because of his friend, Friedrich Engels. So Engels and Marx are kind of the same person. They're not literally the same, but when it comes to politics, they have the exact same opinion. So this class is about Marx, but it could as well have been about Engels. Marx is just a bit more famous than him. But they're very similar thinkers. So I can treat them as the same person, basically. What's interesting is that Engels was a capitalist. Not by choice, he was the son of somebody who owned factories. So Marx both knew a lot of poor people, he knew a lot of rich people, right? He knew everyone, let's say, in society. He had a very broad view. And he wrote many books. His 2 main works, one is the Communist Manifesto, which you had to read, and the other is Capital, his main work that took him over 10 years to write. All right. So my main point in this lecture is that Marx is a heavyweight. Marx is different and better than any theorist we saw so far. He's on a weight class of his own. It is not comparable. That's for 3 reasons. First of all, Marx was world-changing in his impact. The ideas of this man actually changed the world. One of the ways is that he inspired many communist revolutions, which at some point, about 50 years ago, ruled half the world, right? So there was quite a big impact, but it goes beyond that. He inspired a lot of social reform. He inspired a lot of democratic reform. Democracy in Belgium is partly there thanks to Marx. So we are thankful to him for that. So he really impacted things, right? He changed history. He's an impact. He made a lot of contributions. Even if Marx was not a professor, he's the forefather of many fields. For example, he's the forefather. My sociology class in tech starts with Marx. Marx is the first author we discuss. He laid the groundwork for that. He laid the groundwork for political economy as a field, and many other things. And that is partly because he, for his time, was very scientific. So yes, he's a political philosopher, but Marx never just says things. Marx would back up everything he says with overwhelming evidence. So if Marx would say, the workers often get sick, he would have a footnote, and in that footnote you would have 40 reports from health inspection committees backing up that the workers actually got sick, right? He was very thorough in his evidence that he would provide for things. That's why he wrote so slow. Like his main work took 10 years to write. Yeah. So it's not that easy to argue with Marx because he comes prepared with anything. And lastly, Marx actually did things. Marx was not just an author. Marx did not just live in his room and write books Marx was out there. In his time, he was famous already as an activist. First as a journalist, somebody who was just around important events, he was covering them. In a lot of events. He took part in a dozen of uprisings, protests, to become more democratic. He was in all kind of small things. His daughter founded Labour, the British party Labour that still exists today, with Jeremy Corbyn, right? Marx's daughter, Laura, founded that party. Marx himself, he founded the Communist League, and very important, he was president twice of the International Workers Association, which means that the international workers, right, this is the first syndicate that existed, chose him to be their leader twice. So Marx has also real street cred, let's say. He's not just talking about the workers. Workers knew him and liked him while he was alive. About his way of thinking, right? I hope you can still hear me. Let's circle around it, then we're going to dive in deep, right? How is Marxism? Well, first of all, it's historical, just like Hegel. If you read the Communist Manifesto, right, it starts as a history story. He's going to narrate you what happened. It's the same method as Hegel uses. The difference is Marx is a lot more focused on culture. He's not focused on the. So he's an economic historian, basically. The other thing that set him apart is that his focus was to uplift people from their problems, right? He writes not about abstract things. He's not writing about what God really wants or about natural rights, or the state of nature. He's writing about why a baby has no health care. He's writing about, my God, 4 of my children died, 3 of my grandchildren died of hunger, right? No, not hunger, lack of medical care. Why don't we have clean water in London? Why are we being exploited? Why are there still slaves, right? That's the type of things he's writing about. He's writing about that real stuff, right? Not philosophical niceties. So this was about uplifting humanity, not about some concepts. And position, he is also more normative than other thinkers. Marx is not just describing how it is. He wants to change things. That's his whole mission in life. So he says philosophers only interpreted the world, but the point is to change it. And not just any change. Marx did not come to change some company, make things sound better. No, he wanted a radical change. Marx wanted to change the entire system, right? It was not about just tweaking things a bit like Locke or like Hegel wanted. He wanted to create a whole new world, a communist world. But today we're not talking about communism, because although Marx was a communist, Marxism is not the same as communism. Marxism is a critique of capitalism, right? So today we're talking about capitalism, not communism. And his idea of communism is not the same as what we have today as communism anyway. So this is not necessarily related to Marx, but I'll explain that another time. Yeah. So just forget about communism for today. And lastly, Marx's modernist appeal is that from the beginning, he is writing in a universalist sense. He is not writing about any particular country. He's not writing about Germany, he's not writing about France, he's not writing about UK. He's writing about the situation of the global working class, right? He's writing about slaves, he's writing about people in the US, he's writing about people in Germany, he's writing about people in Russia. He's talking to everyone. which is very different than Hegel, for example, which is mainly talking to Germans, right? So he doesn't, there's no such thing really as borders in Marxism as a relative category. They don't really matter to his analysis where a country starts or ends. It's about society, not about countries. All right, so let us dive in. Shall I try to bring my camera back? Let's see. I mean, you enjoyed a peaceful day without seeing me, but do I sound like a robot already?
No, you sound
Not yet.
all right.
Not yet, just tell me, right? Okay, so let's talk about this way of thinking, right? Let's start zooming in. If to start with, well, his method, which is dialectical materialism. Last week, we spoke about dialectics with Hegel, right? This back and forth towards the truth. This, I say something, you say something opposite, we kind of meet in the middle, this type of way of arguing. Well, Marx does the same, except he is not talking about ideas. His dialectics are material. And by material, we mean it in the materialist sense, in the sense of stuff, cars, and shoes, and factories and land, right? Material dialectics is the dialectic of economic conditions, basically, and wealth distribution. Economical evolution of the world, right, and how the economical system evolves, that really determines the cultural system. Okay, I'll turn my camera off. I get too many slow network. So is that you have the history of ideas, and that influences society, right? How it's built. Marx is going to say the opposite. He said, no, you have the history of society and how we work, and that is going to influence the culture and the ideas, right? So they have the same method, but they're looking at different things. Marx's logic is that your mode of production is going to determine the distribution. So if you have a slave society, a society built on slavery, right? Well, then the slaves are going to get nothing and the owners are going to get everything. Well, if you have a feudal society, which is based on land, that means that the people who own land are going to be the richest, right? A lot more than other people. Then you and the other people who earn more than the rest, you're going to you're gonna live together, say, right? And slowly you're going to become a group. You're going to become a class. The same with the poorer people, right? We'll start forming social classes. And these classes, since there's an unequal distribution, they're going to struggle, right? They're going to over things. And that, Marx says, that's what drives history. Your mode of production is going to create a certain class distribution. This is going to be unstable. And from that instability, we're going to have change. So history really is driven by the struggle for the means of production, Marx says. We're fighting about a lot of things, about revenge, about family feuds, about religion. But if you zoom out long enough, he said the real thing people are struggling over is control of the means of production. Right? It's about having oil. It's about who gets to own these resources. It's about factories, etc. Right? That is what the real struggle is about. And that's not just between countries, that's within countries, right? Which class has the power? Which class gets to decide how we work, right? Because every day we need to get up, we need to do a certain amount of things to make the economy happen. And depending on how we do them, we're going to get a certain distribution. Communist society is different from a capitalist one, right? So this, these inherent tensions between the classes over the means of production, that is what drives history. What drives history is the fact that capitalism will always create drama, basically. And that's why we have change. That's why the world is not just a repeat of itself. Right. So capitalism here is very important. But, dear students, what is capitalism? If I say capitalism, what do you think of? What's the first thought that comes to your mind? I say capitalism, don't overthink it. I say capitalism, you think of what? Type it to me, please, in the chat. Capitalism, first thing that comes to mind, first word. Teams has a retarded thing that when people type, it pops up in the same frame as where you see them type it. So I see exploitation, money, money, money. Individual interest, bourgeoisie, money, 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 money. Monopoly, USA, work, privileges, money. Based on employee relationships. Okay. Work, money, money, and more people say money. You know, students, one thing that students never say when I say capitalism is capital. Capital, right? Capital is not just money. Capital is money invested in if I have 500 pesos, that is, oh, I froze again. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah, capital is money invested with the goal of creating more money. So if that is not capital, because I intend to spend it on one of my hobbies, right? While if I would pesos and I would buy stock from Lala with it, right? Now it becomes capital. So capital is the money invested in more value, which could be money, right? But capital is not just money. Capital is also the investment. If I buy land, that land now is capital. Given, I will use it to make more money. Yes. So capital is money invested with the intent of making more money. Now, capitalism is a society based on making more money. It's a society in which your life is organized around the accumulation of more capital by capitalists, right? So in capitalism, the stress is on unlimited accumulation of capital by eternal reinvestment. It's about always making more money forever. There's no end to this, right? You make more money. Why? To invest it in making more money. Why? To invest it in making more money. Why? And you get this, right? That is capitalism, and everybody needs to dedicate their life to that. And that happens in a sort of endless competition between capitalists. competition nonetheless, right? Because they're always trying to get more money. That's their addiction. And this competition also drives them again to try to make more money. And you don't want to lose a competition. You don't buy another company. So to be more profitable. This eternal race. But how is this done? This labor, right? Because capital is an investment. An investment, by definition, you're not doing yourself. Otherwise, it would be an expenditure, not an investment, right? An investment means that you put money somewhere and that needs to then become more money, which means that someone else is going to have to do that for you. And that is the people who work, right? So this is based on wage labor. So capitalism is about endless accumulation, competition, and wage labor. Or in the world, distinguishes capitalism from other social systems, our modes of production, is that human beings engage in the production process where exchange was produced. That's not Marx, right? This is now let's go back to Marx. Oh dear. Okay, so this capitalism, right, is creating certain instability, and it's based on this labor relationship. So let's talk a bit about the workers now. Or what Marx calls the proletariat. That's his word for the working class. It's a very interesting word. The word proletariat comes from Roman tax code. The proletariat is a tax bracket that you could be in. And what does it mean? It literally means people with children. That's what it means. So what it tells the tax collector is that the only thing these people have that he could take children. In other words, these people have nothing, right? The only thing they have is bodies. There's not a single coin he could collect from them. He could just draft their kids into the army. That's the best thing he could do. That's the proletariat, right? People who only have body, who just have themselves. In other words, the poor, the working class. Now, Marx is the first major philosopher who's going to fully focus on the working class. That's his main interest, is the life of working people and how to improve it, right? He introduces a whole new question into political philosophy that somehow we didn't ask for 2000 years, which is insane. He's like, oh yeah, very interesting about who should be the king and divide right and stuff. But how can we make life better for people? And everybody was like, why are you asking that question, man? Come on, let's stick to the important stuff. But his main interest is how can we improve living conditions of people? So his focus is on this working class. Now, the working class, the proletariat, is a creation of capitalism. Capitalism, by its nature, by how it functions, divides society in two classes. Actually, the ones are small and irrelevant to my story. So the one group, right, is the people who have nothing. If you have nothing, then you have to work to survive, right? The only thing you have is your physical energy, and you're going to sell that energy, you're going to sell your time, or you're going to rent it, better said, to people who do have money so you can eat. That's what I do, and that's what most of you will be doing in your life, right? In other words, we will be the working class. While the other group is a group that does have money, and they provide the means of production, right? They have the factory in which you can work. and the opportunity and the market access for this production process. So in capitalism, you have two groups, with people who have stuff and therefore they can offer jobs, and then you have the people who are going to work in those jobs. In other words, you have these two groups. On the one hand, you have the workers, the obreros, the proletariat, versus, on the other end, on the blue corner of the ring, we have the capitalists, the bourgeoisie, the Mireilles, right, on the other end. And they're opposed to each other, Marx says. They are in a kind of unresolvable each other. He's a very conflictive view of society, right? That's central Marxism. It's this conflict between these two groups. Now, why is that? Why are they in conflict with each other, dear students? Well, I'm going to answer that on my next slide. My next slide is the most important slide of this lecture, of this semester, maybe of your career. Because in this slide, I'm going to explain you the secret of life and society, which is exploitation. Right? We're going to talk about the exploitation of the proletariat. This is the main concept in Marxism, is exploitation. And by exploitation, it doesn't mean being enslaved or something. Exploitation just means that you're being forced to enrich others by working for them. So you're going to work, you're going to produce things, but the benefit of that is going to be for someone else. Then you're being exploited, right? If I make you write essays and then I use those essays and publish them under my own, exploited you. Yes, it's very simple to understand. Now, what here is the problem, right? To understand this, we need to take a lot of step backs. So gather around the campfire and listen to me. We have to start by understanding what work does. Work, I'm being invaded. Hello, man. My son, he's coming to steal candy. Look at him. He's all about, oh yeah, you can't see him. He's all about that candy. Friend, I'm explaining important things here. Can you please? Okay. Anyway, what was I talking about? I was talking about exploitation, right? Work. Work creates value. So where does value come from, right? Marx, just like Adam Smith, by the way, capitalist thinker, thinks that the root of all value is work. Why is that? If I have a stick, right, I'm walking, what I'm doing is I'm trying to hunt goats, okay? I'm a hunter, and I find a stick. The stick has a limited use. I can smack the goat with it, right? But smacking goats with a stick is not a very efficient way of hunting. So what is more interesting is I would have a spear, right? Now to make the spear, I need to take a knife and I need to sharpen the stick until it's a spear. Now I have a spear. The spear is better because I can stab the goat with it, which will kill it faster than hitting it, right? Now what's the difference between the spear and the stick? If you would subtract them from each other, right? If you would do spear minus stick, what you would get is work, right? Work is the difference between the two of them. It is work which created the more useful item out of nature. Yes. So all value in a sense comes from work. Another example, if you on the street buy a bag of nopales from an old lady, right? You're not actually paying her for nopales because nopales are for free. They grow everywhere. Right, in Mexico, you just go into the desert, you find them, you have to hack them with a machete, and then you have nopales. But you're not going to do that. Yeah, you're not trying to get into the desert with your machete just to get a snack. Instead, this old lady, she went into the desert with her machete to hack away at the cactus, then take it back, then chop it into pieces, then pack it in a bag and walk to your neighborhood so she could offer it to you, right? That's what you're really paying her for doing all this work so you could eat a snack, right? And the same goes for anything, even raw resources, right? The real value of coal is that somebody dug it out of the ground and brought it to you so you could have your carne asada, right? The coal itself is just part of the earth. It is the getting the coal out of the earth part that creates the value of it. So all value comes from work, dear students. I hope you understand that by now. And that's not a Marxist idea, that's just a classic economical idea. But Marx asks the question, if all value comes from work, then where does profit comes from, right? How do capitalists somehow get this kind of surplus value, this extra value, without working? Because if the workers make all the value, then how are people that are not working, or at least not working in production, how are they somehow getting so rich? So something is wrong here, right? There has to be some kind of secret to this. Well, let me explain you what the secret is. The secret is that you always create more than you're rewarded for. That's what Marx is going to call exploitation. And this is a very logical idea, right? Your boss is not going to hire you if you're not going to create more money for him than he has to pay you, right? Why else would he hire you? He's not going to hire you so he would lose money on that. But how does that work? So let's go get pizza, right? Let me take you to the pizza place. It's nothing to do with how miserable the pay is. So let's have pizza, right? Most of the time, I don't know about you, but when I eat pizza, it's usually because I don't want to cook. Pizza is not that special, right? It's made out of dough and tomato sauce and cheese. This is not very exotic. I usually eat pizza just because I don't want to cook, and I think most people do that, right? So most of the value of the pizza really comes from the cooking of it. So, okay, imagine you're working in Domino's Pizzas, yeah? Let's say you work there alone that night, your buddy, he got sick or something. The client comes in, he orders a pizza, let's say it's the Napolitana or something. Okay, you start working, right? You start making the dough, you spin it, you put it down, you put tomato paste on it, all the ingredients, blah, 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 blah. You put it in the oven, you do everything, you start packaging. You make the pizza. You give the pizza to the client gives you 150 pesos. Okay, let's pause time here. Here is what does not happen. What doesn't happen is that you take the 150 pesos and you say, okay, there's 50 pesos for all the materials I used and the electricity, then there's 20 pesos for the rent, and then there's 10 pesos for the boss for his administrative work, right? That goes into cashier, and the remaining 70 or 60 pesos are for me, right? You don't do that. You would get fired that moment if you would do that. What really happens is you put all money in the cashier, and you keep doing that the rest of the day and the rest of the week and the rest of the month. And at the end of the month, your boss is going to come by. He's going to take all that money. And he's going to take 2 bills of it and give it to you. He's going to like, here, worker, your wage. And you're like, thanks, boss. But what you forget is that you made all that money. The boss only comes at the end, right? And this is crucial. People get paid at the end of the month. You made the money that pays you. So never forget. The boss does not pay the worker. The worker pays the boss, and the boss gives them back a little bit of that. Yeah. Your boss doesn't pay you. You pay your boss. You get paid at the end of the month. He doesn't invest in you. You first create the money, then you get part of it back, right? Now the part that you don't get back, right? This is the surplus. This is profit. And that is possible because the owner of the means of production is the one who has the upper hand in your relationship. Because he needs, you need him more than he needs you. So he is going to decide the distribution of the surplus. He's going to decide how much he's going to pay you, right? Or whatever your contract says. And also other work conditions, right? What you're making, what the menu is. You cannot invent pizzas, right? If the airco is on or not. All these things are out of your control, right? These are controlled by the boss. Now, you might think, yeah, but it's that simple. Why don't we notice it? Well, it's a bit more complex because technically the boss, capitalist, he doesn't really steal the value from the worker. What he really does is steal their time. So how does this work? Okay, you get to work, right? We're still in Domino's Pizzas. You start working, 9 a.m. They serve late breakfast, okay? It's going to take you a certain amount of hours in your day to earn the money of your wage, right? To earn, let's say you get paid by the day. It's going to take you, let's say, until 12 to earn that money back. Now, here's what does not happen. What does not happen is once you earn your wage, you're like, all right, I earned my wage. High five, boss. I'm out, right? You know, you want me to work, you pay me, I did the work you paid me for, we're done. That's not what happens. No, you signed a 10-hour contract. You are going to stay there till the evening, right? So everything you do from 12 onwards is for free. All the work you do from there onwards is pure profit, right? So this is the big trick of capitalism. You are, as a worker, you're going to get paid for your work, but the capitalist will be able to get more value out of you than you get back from that, right? You're not going to get the value that you produce, and that's because of time. So next time you're at your job, if you work, right, just think, at what part of my day have I earned my daily wage? And try to just calculate that on average. Let's say you work in a call center. Okay, how many phone calls have I made enough money to pay myself? And then be very conscious that from that moment onwards, you're working for free, right? That's how it works. So let's try to have a good understanding of this, of what Marx means with exploitation, right? Wait a second. I'll be right back. I'm sorry, my son locked himself out, which is not good. All right. Exploitation, right? Exploitation is not the same as violation. You don't need to be, because we sometimes, if we use the word exploitation in a normal sense, right, we usually think of it in a violent way, right? That's not what Marx means. You don't need to feel be violated, because some of you might be listening to this and think, yeah, but that's only about poor people, right? My daddy or my mommy, she has a good job. She's a manager and she's not being exploited. You're wrong. Exploitation has nothing to do with how. Matter of fact, highly educated people get more exploited often than poor people do. Let me explain this to you. Let's compare two people, right? Let's compare a construction worker who's going to earn 3,000 pesos, and let's say he only produces 9,000 pesos, right, in value. His rate of exploitation thus is 1/3, but it's a 3/1, right? He earns 9, he gets 3. 3/1. Yes? Let's compare him to a private university professor. My wife, for example, in UDEM. Yes? Highly educated. She earns, let's round it up, 40,000 pesos. You're not poor if you earn 40,000 pesos a month, right? It's quite good for Mexican standards. However, if you look at the subscription money to her courses, she brings in, even minus taxes, etc., easily 400,000 pesos a month. So it's 400,000 over 40,000. In other words, it's 10/1, right? So the worker, the construction worker, is 1/3, and the university person is 1/10. In other words, the university person gets more exploited. She has a higher rate of exploitation, right, than the construction worker. So you don't need to suffer. You don't need to be sad about exploitation for it to be exploitation, right? So your dad, if he's a manager, he gets exploited too, right? Now in Marx's time, this is often the same thing, right? The poor would suffer more because their working conditions would be worse, right? They had to work 16 hours a day and they would get beaten at the job. And as women, they would get harassed on the job. So exploitation was violation, but they don't have to mean the same thing. You don't need to physically suffer to be exploited. We often use that word wrong. Now you might think, okay, but hey man, Marx wrote this 200 years ago, right? He didn't actually, 150 years ago. Things have changed, right? Things are better now. Things have changed. You're right, things have changed, but they did not get better. Let me show you the rate of exploitation. This is an awesome graph, which shows you product distribution amongst production factors. What it shows you is if you create 100 pesos in value, who gets what? The blue line is capital. The orange line is labor, right? The higher the blue line, the more of that 100 pesos goes to the boss. The higher the orange line, the more of those 100 pesos go to the worker. And this is on a timeline. So the further you are to this side, to the right of that picture, the later it is in time. This goes from 1970 to 2012. So what you can see that in 1970, of 100 pesos, capital would take 65 of them, and the worker would get 35. That's already bad, right? In a good country, the orange line is above the, not in Mexico. But then we have el periodo neoliberal, and then by 2012, right, the orange line is around 25, and the blue around 75, which means that over time, capital actually took another 10% of the production. So what this means is that your average standard Mexican exploitation rate is 4/1, right? It means that for every 100 peso, the boss takes 75% of that. You only get 25% back. So if all the work you do in life, you get 25% of all the work you do. That's how you should visualize it in your mind, right? All the effort you're ever going to do, you're going to get paid 25% of that on average. And that got worse over time. So what is, and that's average, right? Average is heavily skewed by people who earn a lot. For people at the bottom, it could be worse. What are the consequences of this, right? Of this secret? So you now learned that you pay the boss doesn't pay you, and you get about 25% of what you are worth back. The rest is profit. What this means for society is that capitalism will automatically create inequality. It will create ever-growing inequality. And this is a fact. This is just how it is. If you would look at statistics, if you don't believe this, you should read a book, Capital in the 21st Century, for example, by Piketty, Nobel Prize candidate. So inequality always grows automatically. Why? Here's the sad thing. Because the poor create it, not the rich. The rich don't create inequality, the poor do. Why? Because of the following mechanism. If the poor have to work, right? By working, they're gonna make someone else's rich. Now there is no way out of this without benefiting the capitalist class. Let's say you say, oh, I'm tired of being poor, I'm gonna work hard, right? Everybody's gonna be like, yay. So you're gonna work hard, you're gonna try to get promoted, etc. At every step of the way, every time you climb up, you are giving 75% of your work to the person above you, right? So in order for you to get up the ladder, you need to push the people above you up as well. There's no way to get ahead in life without enriching the people you work for first and more than you. So even if you do good in life, you're pushing the people who are better than you upwards. For every step you take, they take 3 steps forward. Because of you, you're giving them this money, right? By working for them. And it gets worse, that's just during the workday. After the workday, right, let's talk about consumption. The capitalist is going to keep almost everything you give him, right? And since he's a capitalist, he's going to reinvest that. Okay, he's going to buy a yacht and hang out with prostitutes and such, but that's just a little bit of his money, right? That goes to strip club. Most of his money is going to reinvest in hiring more people that make him more money. You, on the other hand, right, you're going to spend your money because you need to consume to survive. First thing you're going to do is you're going to pay rent paid to another rich person. So half your money already gone, right? Rent, it goes right back to the capitalist class. The other half you're going to spend on consumption. You're going to buy things. Who do you buy this from? Not from the government, from companies owned by capitalist class. So 90% of the money that you've earned is going to go right back to the people who paid you, right? So inequality is automatic. If this happens in month number 1, in month number 2 is going to be worse because you didn't save, they saved. Month number 3, they saved even more. You still didn't save. So every month, this is getting worse. During the pandemic, the capitalist class increased their money by 25%. So we all going like bankrupt and unemployed, etc. The richest people got 25% richer in this year alone. It's automatic. And this is inherent. This is just how the system works, right? This is how life works. And therefore, it's unresolvable in Marx's eyes, right? This graph, somebody's going to be on top, right? It comes directly at the cost of the other. It's a zero-sum game. You could have the state as like a third actor in here, but then we get to socialism. That's a whole different theory. But they're going to get the money. Either the wage is higher or the profit is higher, right? So this conflict is unresolvable. The capitalist class will always try to get more profit. The worker will always try to get more wage or better living conditions or more control. And they're just locked in this eternal fight with each other over this. Now, let's take a step back, right? Marx's argument is based on justice. He says inequality is unfair because I'm working for other people, right? I get alienated by the fact that I'm doing all this work, but I'm not related to any of my labor. Sometimes I don't even know what I'm working for. Sometimes some people don't even know literally what they're doing, right? When they work. Like I once saw a documentary of people working on a cacao farm making chocolate, except they didn't know what chocolate was. These were 3 generations of farmers. They would be digging up cacao, which is a type of nut, right? A bean in the ground. And they just work 14 hours a day, dig up the beans, sell them to a trader, go to sleep, work again. They had no clue what this actually did. They didn't know what chocolate was. When somebody showed them chocolate, like, oh my God, it's sweet, right? So anyway, Marx bases on justice. He does not base his argument on morals. It's not a Christian argument against exploitation. He's not saying the capitalist is bad, because the capitalist is just playing the game. And he needs to exploit his workers, because you cannot make profit without it. There's no such thing as a good or a bad capitalist in Marx's vision. There's just capitalists, right? And there's workers. So he's not judging the capitalist for doing this. Of course, he hates him probably in real life, right? But in his writing, he's not judging them. Neither is he basing his theory on that it's somehow dysfunctional. He doesn't say that it doesn't work. He's not saying that, oh, inequality is bad because it creates crime or something like Plato did. No, he's just saying it because it's unfair, right? So one very common misunderstanding is the idea that Marx is against money, which he is not. Marx is not against people having money or having nice stuff, right? Having a nice car does not stop you from being a Marxist or even a communist. It's this thing on the internet with memes, right? Oh, how can you be Marxist if you, I don't know, have an iPhone? This has nothing to do with each other. It's not about what you have. It's about how you earned it in Marxism, right? His problem is with how people get rich, not that they are rich. Some people get rich without exploitation. If you take, for example, a football player, Messi, Lionel Messi. Okay, technically some people work for him, like his masseuse, etc. But if we ignore that for a second, right? Messi is an employee. He's a worker. He works for a football club, right? Nobody plays football for him. He's the one playing the football. Yes. So if a worker, because he's a football star, somehow gets rich, Marx has no problem with that, because he earned it, right? Marx's problem is when you have other people work for you, right? So I, for example, I think my car is nice, but I work for the government and nobody works for me, right? So nobody's earning my money. I'm earning my money. It's very different if I had a restaurant that I owned, that I am never there, just I once bought it and other people keep working there, right? They just make money for me. That's what Marx has a problem with. Okay, I hope you understand exploitation now. Do you have any questions about exploitation? What I explained to you, by the way, is the dummy version of this. There's a lot more complex way of explaining the same thing, which I could do, but I'm going to hold off on it for now. But do you have any question of how exploitation works before I steam on to the next subject?
No, but how did Marx intended to have wealth and nice stuff if it was not through exploitation?
I will answer that soon. He thinks that it is possible to have a production system without owners. So in short, you would have, I'm going to explain this idea later, but to answer your question directly, you'd have a system in which the workers would own the means of production. So the workers would own the factory. So the profit is not going to anyone else but the worker. It's like if you're independent, right? If you work for yourself, but then with more people. That's in short his alternative. But we'll get to that. So now let's switch to a different idea, right? So I explained the exploitation. I want to also explain another core idea of Marx, which is a bit difficult. Students often don't get this. It's a typical thing people would fail. Was he against investments? He's critiquing capitalism, and capitalism is a logic of investment, because investment means that you're going to give money, that you're going to use money to hire people who are going to make you more money, which is unfair towards those people, and it leads to a system of exploitation and basically stepping on each other to get ahead. So I was saying, I'm going to explain you something that's a bit difficult, but I'm just going to go ahead and try it. It's a superstructure theory. In short, is that those who have economic power are going to use that economic power to influence everything else, right? This kind of mafia de poder type of logic. So what's this idea, right? This idea is a bit abstract, but try to follow along. The idea is that the economic relations in society, right? Who works for who, how production is organized, that's going to be the foundation of society, what he calls the structure of society. So imagine it like a building, right? This is the ground floor. This is the ground plan of a building, right? And the things that go into the earth, etc., and the pillars. That forms a structure. Now, this distribution, this economic relationships, who works for who, that is going to determine the other parts of society that are built on top of it, the institutional ideological order. That's going to determine the law, the politics, the religion of society, which he calls superstructure. Superstructure, super means above. It's a thing that comes on top of the structure, right? So what he means is that economic power relations, right? They're going to be the basis of how society is organized. If you imagine it like a building, if you go to construction wharf, right? They don't just build a building. They first spend a lot of time on digging on the floor, digging in the earth and making stuff there, right? That's the foundation of the building. Now, this foundation will determine what you could build on top of that. If the foundation is small, you cannot build a wide thing on top of it, right? If the foundation is in a swamp and it's not very solid, you cannot build very high, for example, right? So the structure of a building is going to determine the things that can happen inside a building, right? It has a roof or not, etc., etc. So the idea is that economic power relations are going to translate into other things. So why is this? Marx says, that, look, humans, when they come together, right? The first thing humans need to do is to produce their own livelihood. They need to make stuff, food first, but also clothes, shelter, etc., etc., etc. And they're going to do that in a certain production process. This is going to work a certain way. It could work in a communist way, it could work in a capitalist way, it could work in a feudalist way, it could work in a tribal way, right, where it's hunting elephants or it's making a factory. And that first organization, since it comes first, that's going to shape all the other things humans are going to do. So for example, if you have a mine, right? Let's say we start a mine somewhere in the desert. People are going to work at the mine. Since it's a desert, they're probably going to live around the mine. So you're going to get houses around the mine, right? That's going to develop into a town. Now in that town, the mine is going to be very important, right? It's the center of the city. It's going to influence the culture. It's also going to influence politics. You will have a mayor in that city, but that mayor is going to be very good friends with the owner of the mine, right? Because that really matters to how the city works. So the same with Monterrey as a whole, right? You had industry first, and then you got a city around it, and the culture of that city is very much based in this industrial corporate culture, right? So what this means, I hope you're still understanding me. What this means is that economic influence carries over into all other domains of life. Maria asked you in Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was communist at some point, but this happened in many places, and the communism we had in history is different from what Marx is talking about. But let me first explain this, right? So the structure superstructure is the idea that the structure, which means economic relations, are going to determine the superstructure, which means cultural relationships. It means that people with money are going to have influence over, for example, the law. You will all agree with me that the law in Mexico is heavily biased towards the rich, right? Only until last year, corruption became a heavy crime. Fraud became a heavy crime. Before that, you would get away with it relatively easy, right? If you got convicted at all, because you had this whole system of bribing judges, of all kind of ways, in which the rich typically never really ended in prison. And that's by design. The system is built like that, right? Same with politics. I'm going to talk about that next time. Same with media. Let me give you an example of media, right? So for this theory to be true, the capitalist class, as a class, not as an individual, as a class, would need to have influence over media, for example. Now let me show you how this works. This is outdated. This is from 5 years ago, but it doesn't matter, right? So if you look at TV, for example, all TV in US is owned by 6 companies, today by 5, because Disney bought 20th Century Fox. Same on the internet, right? You have Google, Facebook, and Apple. They own 90% of everything, of all content. Now, if you look at the biggest player here, which is Comcast, you cannot see this, not zoomed in enough. So let me just narrate you, right? This is from 5 years ago, but it doesn't matter, or from 2 years ago. This is part of their board of directors. Now, you might think that on the board of directors of a media company, you would have media people, right? Actors, journalists, composers, etc. This was who I would have on my board. That's not the people who are on the board. Now, understand, people of the board of Comcast literally decide what is on TV, right? That's literally the power they have. Who's in there? You have the CEO of DuPont. DuPont means makes petrochemical stuff. You have the CEO of Aegis Petroleum, which again has nothing to do with media, right? You also have the CEO of Pepsi Cola, who is on the board of Comcast, right? So you have all these capitalists from other companies who decide what is on TV, literally, right? And that goes for any company. Company of any big company is full of people from other companies, which means that they, as a group, control, well, everything. Also, for example, education, right? You work in a public university, where you study there, which then again is a bit beholden to political interests. But in private university, right? Private universities also have a board. Tech and UDEM have a board. And in that board are literally the most influential people in Monterrey, right? For example, in the case of UDEM, UDEM is mainly run by Alpha. The president of the board of UDEM is or was the president of Alpha. The rector of UDEM is the vice president of Alpha. In other words, the biggest companies in the city literally decide what you study if you study at one of these universities. Yes. So you see how these economic relationships have their tentacles go very far, right? The same with religion. I don't have time to explain this now, but I wrote an essay 2 months ago called on decaffeinated Christianity on my on my blog, El Extranjero Político. If you don't understand this, read that essay. It's going to make the same point, but with religion. Every cultural thing is influenced by economical power in capitalism. Well, in any system, Marx says. I hope you understand this. Francisco asked about worker co-op, so I'm going to talk about it a lot in the coming classes. And yes, I've heard of Richard Wolff. He's Marxist. If this is true, what I just told you, if economic relationships influence everything, then they're also going to influence politics, right? And for that reason, Marx has a very dark view of the state. Other leftists, like Hegel, well, Hegel is not a leftist, but people like Rousseau were quite enthusiastic about the state. Marx is not. Marx just sees the state as an apparatus of power that is used to increase the dominance of whoever controls it, right? So if the capitalists have the state, if the capitalist party has the state, then they're going to use the state to increase their advantage, right? To increase their profit rate, to lower taxes, to reduce the minimum wage, to increase the working day, to privatize stuff. That's what they're going to do. So Marx doesn't see the state as a friend. The state is there to be conquered, not to start it. The state at best is something the working class could take away from the capitalist class. But today, maybe not in Mexico, but in his time, right, the state was clearly the enemy, right? And that's very tangible to him. They arrested him and threw him in jail maybe a dozen times, right? They shut down his newspaper, they prosecuted him. This was not an abstract thing that the state was against the working class. They were constantly beating them up, right? So he said, at best, we could conquer the state, right? So his view of politics is extremely conflictive, right? Politics is peaceful warfare. It's struggle. It's a struggle for real power. The real struggle, though, is not the political struggle. The real struggle in history is class struggle. It's a struggle between the capitalists and the workers for who gets to control these means of production, right? For who decides how many percentage of the profit goes to who gets to decide how we live, who gets to decide how the economy is going to evolve. That's the real struggle. And it's the main political force, it's class struggle. Now, there are a lot of misconceptions about what class struggle means, right? First of all, class struggle, class warfare, as he calls it, is not literally war, right? It happens in society. It happens every day. It's not necessarily violent. It can be violent, but the point is not to kill the other class. That's what the French Revolution did, right? But that's before Marx. The point is not to kill the other class. The point is to, well, take their stuff, right? It doesn't need to be, it can be violent, doesn't need to be violent. Class warfare is also protests, marches, lockdowns, things like that, right? Also, class warfare is not a call for warfare, right? It's a description. Marx is not saying, let's do class warfare. He's saying, we are doing class warfare. It's already happening. The communists don't start it. It's always already going on. Class warfare was there yesterday too, right? Even before you understood it was happening, it was happening. The choice is not to start it or not. The choice is, are you aware that this is happening? And are you going to fight or not, right? Because the capitalist class is waging war on you anyway. Every day, they are scheming to take more political power, to find a way to get lower taxes, to find a way to exploit the workers more, to find a way to break their organization, to break our current government, for example. This is happening, if you like it or not. You could only be conscious of this warfare and start fighting back or not. That's the choice, right? But communists didn't start this fight. This fight is hundreds, thousands of years old. So that's class warfare. That's what drives history. How do we end this, right? Because basically history is an eternal struggle for Marx. Well, it's probably not going to end in capitalism. Why is that? Well, first of all, capitalism, we're taught sometimes in school, right? If you learn about economics in high school, they're going to make it seem like capitalism is always there. Like this is natural, like supply and demand, markets, etc. Like this is how humans always lived. That's not true. This is 300 years old, right? We lived 40,000 years without this. Yet things similar to it, but not exactly the same thing, right? Things are always heavily regulated. So capitalism is not a natural state of humanity. We can live in many other ways and have lived in many other ways and do live in many other ways. Neither is it eternal, right? It is not, according to Marx, I'm defending Marx here, is not the final stage of history because it is full of problems. capitalism is full of internal contradictions. The main one being this class struggle, which it cannot solve. Right? But there's many others. There's ecological problems. There's economical problems. There's all kind of problems. So this cannot be the end because the story isn't told yet. There's still a lot of plot twists that have to be resolved, right? Now he says, how do we resolve this? He says the only way to really end the fight, the only way to end this eternal conflict in society over who has the means of production is not to just change it. Because, okay, one class can push out the other class. For example, we saw with the French Revolution, you had the aristocracy, and then they got defeated by the bourgeoisie. But for the workers, life was kind of the same the day afterwards, right? Because, you know, you're still working for someone and you're still poor, right? That's not the solution. The solution is not to just overthrow one class and replace it with the other. The solution is to eliminate classes themselves, Marx says. The only way to end this conflict is to not have two sides, right? Thus, to end ownership relations themselves. If you have no class that has stuff, another class that then has to work to get it, if you can somehow eliminate this, you would have a synthesis. You would end this grand drama of history. How do you do that? Not by eliminating the workers, right? But by eliminating the capitalist class. Not physically, not by killing them, just by stopping them from being capitalists. How do you do that? Well, I'm going to explain this idea in more detail, both in this class and in other classes you can have later in your career. I'm going to haunt you with this, don't worry. But in short, the answer is that in the alternative is an economy where the workers own the means of production, where the workers own the factory. And so they're making profit, but nobody else is making that profit than the people who work in the factory. They get to decide how it's used. So let's go back to Domino's Pizzas, right? But this time it's no longer called Domino's because Domino's is a franchise, right? Now it's called Carina and Friends Pizza, right? So Carina and Friends work there. And okay, you work, you start your shift, you make pizzas, you sell them to clients for money, right? There's still money in Marxism. You put it all in the cash here, and at the end of the month, there's not going to come any boss that's going to take that money. No, you're going to take the money, you're going to pay all your bills, you're going to have money left, and then you're going to decide, you're going to come together in the kitchen, you're going to decide, okay, what are we going to do with this money? Are we going to split it, right? Because it's Christmas time and we all want to buy a little bit more gifts for our families. So we're going to cash out. Or are we going to reinvest it? Are we going to buy a new oven, for example, right? That's how your pizza place will be ran. That's Marx's main alternative to capitalism. A worker cooperative where people work together, they vote at the end of the month what to do, and then they do it. No cent leaves the company. Nobody but you are getting paid from your work in this system. This, as we're going to see next time, never existed in the sense that the whole country did this. It did exist. You had the Paris Commune, which meant that in Paris for 10 weeks, workers took over Paris. This was during a war with Germany. They took over Paris. They actually did this. It worked. It only ended because France made peace with Germany to fight the workers. They're like, Germany, you know what? You win. I don't give a fuck. I need to fight these workers. That's way more scary than, you know, another country invading us. Then France invaded their own capital and stopped this. But in general, no country literally did this, even not communist countries. But it does exist. You do have companies like this. You have thousands of companies in the world. You don't know about them because they try to repress this idea. But this does exist. Some very big companies, even banks, that are actually cooperatives. Marx's idea is to have a whole society made out of that. But that I'll explain more later when we get to different theories of communism. Do you have questions? I still have criticism to give to Marx, but let me hear your questions or your criticism first. Yes. Francisco. Any questions? Maybe any critique, right? I'm very up for defending Marx. So if you want to take your best jab at him, go ahead. Because if you understand what I'm saying, right, this should change a bit your view of the world, right? This is consequential. So what do you think about it? Marx would not be a fan of social entrepreneurship, unless you mean by that cooperatives. So Marx thinks that the solution is not for capitalists to be nicer to the workers. That only delays the problem in a way, right? The solution is just to change everything. He does not, like his friend Engels was a nice capitalist, right? He was, but a capitalist nonetheless, because you have to make profit. You can only make profit by paying people less than they make for you. So Marx is not a socialist. He doesn't want to make things better. He wants to change them completely. Marcos asked, given circumstances in Mexico, what public policies can we propose to reduce social inequality gap? So that's a different question than what Marx is asking, right? Marx says we need to change everything. What could you do? There are various aspects to this. One of the main determinants is the height of the minimum wage. They raised the minimum wage twice in 2019. Yes. Poverty reduced by 3%. People's earnings went up by 6% median in 2019. So you can see the impact of that. So you'd raise the wages. You would formalize. So now we're working in capitalism, right? I'm not answering as Marx. Marx would say scrap the whole system. Within capitalism, you would try to formalize the labor market. Today, 58% of Mexicans don't have a contract, right? They work without Social Security. They work without, or not a full contract. They work without any type of security. You would eliminate debt. You would have to reform taxes. Taxes has been going down for the last 30 years on the top. That means that a disproportional amount of taxes are being paid by trade tax, by what you, if you buy Bubulubu, right, you're going to pay, I know, 7 or 20% of that on tax to the government. Too many taxes come from that. You would need to have more taxes on companies, and especially on people, and then on income from rent, things like that. That would reduce inequality, and you would have policies that redistribute. So what the government is already doing, just a lot more of that, right? Higher pensions, more support to families. That would more investment in public education. That would reduce inequality, but it would never solve it. To solve it, you need a different system, according to Marx. Do you have other questions or some doubts about it? Maybe this lecture made you angry. So Susanna says, isn't there a way for people to get advanced and to get richer? I think that communist countries did relatively well in avoiding this. Most leaders of communist countries, even if they were very bad leaders, were not super rich. So I don't think that is that, I mean, it can happen, but I don't think it's that fundamental of a problem. She says, it's difficult to change. Yes, it's difficult to change, but it has happened. people tried what Marx said, and it happened, right? It's not like it fell apart when they tried it. And we keep making new ways to decrease inequality. Yes, that is true. We have found ways to make capitalism work more slowly in how it creates inequality, but we have not solved the core dynamic. Inequality is growing still, and is worse than it ever was. So yes. At the root, getting richer is just an addiction. There's no point, if you study actually rich people, right? Actually rich people, there is no real end to this. Because there's always somebody richer, right? And if you have a yacht and they have a spaceship and you have a spaceship and you on the moon base, and there's no real end to this. And it's also not about getting stuff. It's just an addiction to more power and just more. It's an insatisfiable emotion. Workers earn money to get a particular thing, right? To buy a car. Capitalists just get money for the sake of getting money in most cases. So it's potentially endless. All right, now let me critique Marx myself, unless somebody has. I believe that it makes a wealth and is both inherently anti-democratic. Capitalism has certain problems with democracy, yes, because in democracy, capitalism is in the end of the day a system of an elite. A democracy is a system of a majority. So they could, don't have to be, but they can at various times conflict with each other. And then one or two things is going to happen. Either democracy wins and you're going to change the laws, or capitalism wins and you're going to eliminate democracy, right? For example, in Bolivia last year, people apparently chose wrong. The foreign powers intervened, dethroned Evo Morales despite winning the election, said it was fraud. Turned out it wasn't fraud. Now the election 3 weeks ago, they won, right? Socialists won the elections, just like they won them all along. But capitalism said no at some point, and they tried to change democracy. Luckily, that story ended well. So I don't know if it's inherently anti-democratic, but it can lead there. But the alternative can also be anti-democratic. It depends how you mean it. Let me critique Marx. To show, I'm a Marxist. This should be. But just to show you, I can, right? Let me have some criticism of him. One of the criticisms you could have of Marx, right? What he said, his essence is just true. Exploitation is a real thing. This is how life works, right? At best, I think, as a capitalist, you can say, your best reply to it is to say, so what? Say, yeah, this is how it works, so what? What are you going to do about it, right? Most people accept this. It works, right? You have shoes. It works, so what? But it is the way Marx describes it. But you can still criticize him. You can say, for example, that this class concept is very simple, right? You could say that there are more than two classes in the world. And actually, he does write about them. He doesn't pay much attention to them, right? You have farmers, you have independent merchants. You also, for example, have poor people who are not workers, right? You have unemployed people. You have handicapped people. They're all poor, but they're not the working class. Marx writes about them, but they're not very central in his big picture, right? So you could say that this class concept is a bit binary. And you could say that in some countries, you have a large middle class, which is technically the working class, but they're just a bit richer, and they don't feel it. They don't feel like they're a separate class, etc. Okay. You could counter this criticism by saying that you can still really divide the world in employers and employees. That still works, right? You're one of both, usually. It's just a bit less sharp. And the other thing is that, yeah, you have countries where this is less,
but those are socialist countries, right? Yes, in Sweden this is less, but Sweden is a country that listened to Marx and tried to improve things. In Mexico, class is a very tangible category, right? There's nothing vague about social class. People know very well in what class other people are, right? We're a very classist society. So Marx is easy to explain in Mexico. This would be a much more abstract lecture in Belgium, but here it's very tangible what I'm talking about. You could also say that Marx is too deterministic, that this idea that the economy decides everything, right, that's too simple, too one-dimensional. And that's a good criticism, because it's not true that culture is literally following the economy in everything, right? Culture of its own. Religion, for example. Religion is not just simply following what the people in power want. It's very influenced by it, but sometimes the economy is also influenced by religion, right? Some religions, for example, forbid the taking of interest. To have loans that you don't have interest. In Judaism, classic Judaism forbids that for other Jews. Christianity had forbidden that for a long time. So sometimes religion does influence the economy. It's not just one direction. Then again, that's just Marx. People after Marx understood this problem, later Marxists. Important one of them was Antonio Gramsci, who wrote a more cultural theory of Marxism. So you could say this. And a last criticism, which we're going to see next time, is that Marx is very pretentious, right? Marx essentially is writing sociology, is writing political philosophy, but he talks about it as if these were the laws of physics. He writes very confident if you would read him. And for good reasons, because he has a lot of evidence, but it is not science, right? Well, it's social science, but it's not like you cannot just predict history from his analysis. You cannot think that far ahead. We're going to see next time that that's where it goes wrong. Marx is correct, I would say 100%, in his analysis of how things are or were. He is less correct in his predictions of how things are going to be. So he is a bit too pretentious in his theory. Then again, he was the best at his time. Nobody did it better in his time. Everybody else was pretentious and they were much more further off than Marx was. But by today's standards, you wouldn't write that confident anymore as he did. All right, students, I'm done talking. Do you have any last questions or remarks? And if not, did you like this lecture? Okay.
Well, I really liked it at least.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
you can think of criticism for next time if you want, right? I take all comers with this. So I'm the only philosophers I actually defend. Okay, good. Then I let you go. As I said yesterday, I was wrong. I said there was yesterday going to be a lecture of the ambassador of US. That's today. Are we going to talk about alienation? Not really, Miss Astrid. I teach about alienation, but in my sociology class, in political terms, actually we are going to talk about alienation. Scratch that. Yes, I think we are. Next Monday. But it's more a sociological topic. Let's see. Fran's going to start overthinking. No, please overthink. You're a student. You got time for this. All right. Then I'm going to let you go to your next class. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank
Have a
you.
good
Thank
day.
you.
Bye.